Welcome back to Business Talk, brought to you by the Sharonville Chamber of Commerce. I'm Britt Scarce, your host. I'm with Emory Federal Credit Union. And here in studio today, we have two Marks. We have Mark Hatke and Mark Messerschmidt. And we're going to be talking a little bit about the Veterans Hiring Initiative that's being spearheaded by the Chamber of Commerce, by the Sharonville Chamber of Commerce. Mark, we talked a little bit in our previous segment a little bit about your military experience and how some of those skills that you learned in the military basically helped you in business. They transcend not just the military, but transcend into the business world. So tell us a little bit about your service and a little bit about how those skills that you learned, how they transferred into this business world that we're in.
Sure. Well, I went in the Air Force at the age of 18, so pretty much grew up in the Air Force. I spent 20 years in, and even at the end of that, I went, took a month off, and then went back into the exact same office. So basically changed my uniform into civilian clothes and went back doing a very similar job to what I was doing in the Air Force for a couple of years. But I'm actually from Cincinnati, and my kids were young, so we moved back here and took a job for a couple of years, and then actually started our own company back in 2005.
That's great. Now, Mark, tell us a little bit about your military experience and kind of what you're doing now.
Well, I currently work as a packaging team manager at the Miller Coors Trenton Brewery, and in a previous life, I served as a United States Army Ranger for 22 years. Very similar to Mark's story. I went in shortly after high school, and I went from the rank of private to platoon sergeant and decided to go to the officer candidate school program. I became a commissioned officer, and then I retired about 4 years ago, like I said, at the rank of a major. And I worked for Kroger for a little while and started to learn some of the same things about business that Mark learned, and I've eventually wound up to where I'm at right now.
Yeah. So what specific skills, helped you transition into the business world?
Well, I was an Army Ranger, and jumping out of planes
I was
and
going to say,
catching
did
terrorists.
you have to jump out of planes at all in your job now?
Jumping out of planes and catching terrorists doesn't translate real well into the private sector. I did not see any jobs like that on Monster.com. But I did learn a lot about myself while I was on active duty in the military. I went in very young and didn't know what I wanted to do. I didn't know where I wanted my career to go, and I heard about this Ranger thing, and I thought, that sounds cool, I'll give that a shot. And I went and I did it, and I was successful at it. Then I saw other opportunities to be a jump master, where I actually got to push the guys out of the plane, and I was pretty good at that. Got an opportunity to go to sniper school and learn how to shoot guns at targets that were a mile away, and wow. I excelled there. So I learned a lot about myself in the military, and that whatever was challenging was where I wanted to be. And that if I really applied myself and I focused on what it was I was doing, there was no challenge that I couldn't accomplish.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm sure that doing that kind of stuff, I mean, you don't fear much, I'm sure. I mean, there's not probably a lot of situations that you're in where you're, where you're fearful. I'm sure that helped you be able to operate under pressure, and that's a great skill to have in any profession.
So it's funny you mentioned that. I got a story about that. So there was a particular time where things were getting a little hairy and people around me were starting to panic. And one of the guys that worked for me said, "You stay really calm in situations like that." And I said, "Would you feel better if I freaked out too?" And he said, "No, I think that's a good trait." So I've realized along the way that staying even-keeled and very focused and don't let the situation get the best of you is a good is a good presence for any leader to have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Were there any surprises in your transition from military to civilian life?
Oh, none
in
at
the
all.
Business world?
There were a lot. Yeah, like I said, I was 18 when I went in, so I never held any kind of a professional job. I mean, I'd worked at Taco Bell, I'd bust tables, I didn't have to have any kind of training or leadership skills or anything to do those things. So, going through the 20 years in the military, and actually another 2 years as a contractor, there were a lot of surprises. You know, I mentioned in our previous segment that I knew nobody here in Cincinnati. We moved here from Colorado after I retired, and other than my family, knew nobody. So I knew nothing about starting a business, running a business, doing all those things. I could lead a group of airmen in any task I was given in the military, but it became very challenging to translate those things over into a business and pull on some of those skills to actually learn how to grow my business. And I was taken aback by that. I've always been very successful at whatever I planned to do, and we had some concerns early on that we might not be successful. So it was very daunting, but we're here 12 years later, so I think we figured it out.
Yeah, absolutely. And Mark, what would you say were the biggest barriers of, transitioning?
Well, really, I was surprised when I got out by how hard it was to actually get a job. When I was in the military, I was told from day one that people want to hire you. You're the kind of people that employers are looking for. And I found as I was going through the transition into the private sector that I was having a hard time communicating with employers. I was having a very hard time letting them know who I was. I remember sitting in an interview at one point, and the question I was given was, explain to me a situation where you made a decision that resulted in improved profits for your company. And I'm thinking, I was a major in the Army 4 months ago. We really didn't work on profit and loss. So that really wasn't an applicable question, so I had to try to find a way to tailor my experience into something that would relate to the question that employer had asked me. So really, it was very surprising to me that it was as difficult to transition as it turned out to be.
Now, was there anything that you guys, wish you knew then what you know now, if you had to do it again?
You want to take that one?
Well, I thought separating from the military, excuse me, that I would be able to transition into a job, and the first job out of the Army would set me up, and I would be there for another 20 years. I'm very loyal, I'm very dedicated. I did 22 years in the United States Army, and I thought I'm going to get out on a Friday, and on Monday I'm going to put on khakis and a collared shirt, and I'm going to go work someplace else for 20 years, and it didn't happen like that. So I didn't realize at that time that I was going to have to make steps and progress from one career or from one company to another to get me to where I eventually wanted to be. So that was a little surprising to me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was a little different for me. My path was, like I mentioned, the day I got out of the I took a month off and went back to work in the same organization as a government contractor. So the only real decision I had to make now that I hadn't had to make before was, what am I going to wear to work today? And that was a little bit of a struggle. But and then even the move here to Cincinnati, my family owned a business here, so I went to work for them for a couple of years. So it was in terms of employment, getting employment, I didn't really struggle there. But what I did struggle with was the different ways that businesses run versus how the government runs. Yeah. And that kind of took me back. It was surprising to me.
Civilians don't take orders?
Not very
commands,
many, no. No, they usually have some responses that a lower-ranking military person wouldn't have for you. But it wasn't even that. It was the profit and loss kind of stuff.
Yeah.
In the government, you have a budget, and that's what you work on. And when I was out at NORAD, which is where I was at in Colorado, we had a big budget. So money was not a concern for the most part, and how it impacted the bottom line was not a concern. Did we have enough money to buy the things we needed to do to achieve our mission was all that mattered, and we did. So going in and having to account for what we're spending, not that we didn't have to account for it, but seeing how it's affecting the bottom line of the business, and also seeing how a customer's demands are really the only thing that matter when it comes to making a lot of the decisions. That I found a very different world.
Yeah, yeah. Now, tell me a little bit about this initiative that you guys are participating in at the Sharonville Chamber of Commerce, helping to prepare veterans to interview and be more prepared to enter into the civilian workforce in the business world.
Well, it's very interesting. Dan, from the president of the chamber, came to both Mark and I and mentioned that he had worked on an initiative when he was in Pennsylvania and talked about a lot of the struggles that veterans had getting hired. And it's kind of a two-sided coin in that, as Mark mentioned, translating what it is you do into civilian terms versus government military terms is a very difficult task for a lot of people coming and transitioning out of the military. But there's the other side of that, and that's a lot of employers. They don't recognize a lot of the accomplishments that the military folks have done, and really the leg up that they have on a lot of their competition in terms of the workforce, to be able to even maybe draw some of that out of them and glean that from what they're reading in a resume that is very military heavy. And they miss out just as much as the veterans do.
Absolutely.
So Dan approached us and said, hey, let's try and get something together here where we can reach out to these people, both sides, and see if we can't help educate both of them and provide some opportunities and get some of these guys that are and women that are coming from the military and help them get employed, gainfully employed.
Yeah, so helping local businesses be able to get really sharp folks, get them into some of the positions that are available out here. We constantly see companies that are struggling to hire good people. They're always looking for good people, and yet we have all these folks from the military with all these great skills. We just got to be able to get them to be able to, like you said, be able to speak the same language. Exactly. and really articulate these. These skills into the, basically let them know that this skill that I have jumping out of a plane, could actually there are things there that can transcend the military and everything and actually be used in the business world. Yeah. So do you guys, tell me a little bit about how you hope to get veterans, into this program and how do you plan to have this kind of come together?
Well, in the meeting that we had where we basically brainstormed this whole concept, we talked about a lot of different things, and we realized that employers may not necessarily understand what the resume says that they're looking at. Kind of going back to the earlier discussion with my resume, I didn't know how to be an Army Ranger until somebody trained me. I didn't know how to throw people out of airplanes until somebody trained me. I didn't know how to be a sniper until somebody trained me. But I was very driven and I was very trainable and I had the ability to learn all these skills. And I'm also very loyal, I'm very dedicated, and I have a high level of motivation. And when you bring all those things together, kind of to my earlier point, there wasn't anything that I wasn't able to do. So we really want to start with educating small business, educating employers that there are these types of people out there that you can go and recruit, and they may not have a skill that directly applies to the position that you're trying to fill. But if you're willing to take a chance on them, you might get a really good employee. I went through a couple of interviews and I didn't get hired. And I look back on that and I'm thinking, I would have probably been a really good fit for that job, but I didn't have the resume that they were looking for and they didn't want to take the time to train me. So we're hoping that through this initiative we can educate employers so that when they see veterans come in, they can see the potential that they have. We're also hoping to expand the program to where we reach out to some of the veterans and let them know that this is something that we want to do in the Sharonville community. We want you here. We want you to come work in our businesses, and we want you to live in our communities, and we're willing to help you to do that.
That's great. Mark Hatke, Mark Messerschmidt, thank you so much for your service to our country. Thank you for what you're doing here with this initiative to try to help veterans and businesses in Sharonville be able to fill those positions that are badly needed to be filled and help these veterans find work. I think this is a great thing that you're doing. So thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Well, that'll do it for this particular episode of Business Talk brought to you by the Sharonville Chamber of Commerce. We'll see you next time.